5 days after NATO's largest regional security conference concluded, Jordan quietly opened its airspace to Iranian commercial flights. Not cargo, not emergency routes, full civilian transit access. The decision made without consulting Washington. The timing, deliberate. And if you think this is just an airline story, you're missing the geopolitical earthquake happening across the Middle East right now. Every time a regional partner that the United States has backed for 7 decades makes a move like this, it sends a message to every other country watching. The message Jordan just transmitted is simple. American security guarantees aren't worth what they used to be. And the cost of defying Tehran just became too high to justify. This channel runs on no corporate funding, no government backing, and no advertising pressure telling us what to leave out. If this kind of analysis matters to you, the kind that connects dots mainstream outlets won't touch, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Because what happened in Amman this week is just the beginning of a regional realignment that will reshape the entire Middle East before the end of this year. Let me show you exactly what happened, why the official explanations don't add up, and what Professor Mohammed Marandi's analysis reveals about where this is actually heading. On April 22nd, the Jordanian Civil Aviation Regulatory Commission issued Directive 2026-14 Alpha. The directive authorized Iran Air, Mahan Air, and Keshem Air to utilize Jordanian airspace for direct flights between Tehran and destinations in Lebanon, Syria, and Iraq. Flight paths that previously required long detours through Turkish or Iraqi airspace could now cut straight across Jordan, saving fuel costs and flight time. The announcement came exactly 5 days after the conclusion of the NATO Regional Partnership Summit held in Abu Dhabi, where Jordan's King Abdullah sat in the front row during sessions focused specifically on countering Iranian influence in the Levant. During those sessions, Jordanian officials assured their American and European counterparts that Amman remained committed to the regional security architecture built over decades of Western partnership. 5 days later, Jordan handed Iran something Washington has spent 2 years trying to prevent: normalized access to the airspace corridor connecting Tehran to its allied forces in Lebanon and Syria. The official Jordanian statement described the decision as purely administrative, a routine update to civil aviation regulations designed to improve regional connectivity and reduce flight costs for neighboring populations. That explanation works if you ignore every other data point. It falls apart the moment you look at the timing, the operational reality, and the strategic value of what Jordan just provided. Here's what the official narrative says. This is about civilian flights and economic efficiency. Here's what the operational reality shows. Jordan just gave Iran the most valuable airspace corridor in the Middle East theater outside of Iraqi and Syrian territory itself. To understand why, you need to understand the geography. Iran's primary supply line to Hezbollah in Lebanon runs through Iraqi airspace and into Syrian airspace before reaching the Lebanese border. That route requires overflight permissions from Baghdad and Damascus, both of which Iran already controls through alliance structures. But it also means every flight is tracked by U.S. surveillance platforms operating out of bases in Iraq, by Israeli radar stations monitoring Syrian airspace, and by satellite systems watching the entire corridor in real time. Adding Jordanian airspace creates an alternative route. Flight paths originating in Tehran can now cross directly into Jordan, then into Syrian airspace near the Golan Heights, bypassing the northern Iraqi corridor entirely. The strategic value isn't secrecy, it's redundancy. If Washington pressures Baghdad to restrict Iranian flights during a crisis, Tehran now has a backup route that doesn't require Iraqi cooperation at all. The second layer, Jordan just demonstrated to every other regional partner that it can make independent decisions without waiting for American approval. That demonstration matters more than the airspace itself. For 7 decades, the pattern across the Middle East has been consistent. Regional governments check with Washington before making moves that affect Iranian access or influence. Jordan didn't check. Jordan acted, and Washington found out the same way everyone else did, through a civil aviation directive published on a Tuesday afternoon. Professor Mohammed Marandi, who advises Iran's nuclear negotiating team and maintains close connections to decision-makers in Tehran, described the Jordanian decision as the first visible crack in what he calls the coordinated pressure architecture that the United States has built around Iran since 2018. His analysis, delivered during an interview 3 days after the directive was published, points to something most Western commentators are ignoring. This wasn't a sudden policy shift. This was the culmination of quiet negotiations that began more than 8 months ago. According to Marandi, Iranian and Jordanian officials have been conducting back-channel discussions since August of last year, focused specifically on economic cooperation and airspace access. Those discussions accelerated in January after Jordan's economy showed signs of severe stress from rising energy costs and declining Gulf investment. Jordan needed economic relief. Iran offered airspace fees, increased trade, and potential energy cooperation. The deal that emerged wasn't signed in a palace. It was built through months of technical negotiations, handled by mid-level officials who understood exactly what they were constructing. Now here's what the Pentagon is leaving out of its public statements. U.S. Central Command tracks every Iranian flight operating in regional airspace. Those flights carry civilian passengers, but they also carry cargo. Some of that cargo is medical supplies and humanitarian aid. Some of it is dual-use technology that can support military logistics once it reaches its destination. The distinction between civilian and military becomes meaningless when you control the infrastructure on both ends of the flight path. Opening Jordanian airspace doesn't just help Iranian airlines reduce costs, it gives Tehran an airspace corridor that operates under Jordanian Civil Aviation Authority instead of Iraqi or Syrian authority. If U.S. intelligence wants to inspect cargo on flights using Iraqi airspace, it can pressure Baghdad. If U.S. intelligence wants to inspect cargo on flights using Jordanian airspace, it has to pressure Amman. And Amman just showed it's willing to ignore that pressure. The broader pattern that matters is this: Jordan is the fourth regional partner to make an independent move toward Iran in the past 6 months. Saudi Arabia restored diplomatic relations with Tehran in March of last year. The UAE opened direct maritime shipping routes to Iranian ports in November. Oman never stopped playing the mediator role and has quietly expanded economic ties throughout this entire period. And now Jordan, one of the most strategically positioned American partners in the region, just broke ranks on airspace access. Every adversary watching this is drawing the same conclusion. The regional security architecture built by the United States over 7 decades is fragmenting, not because of military defeat, not because of diplomatic failure, because the cost-benefit calculation for regional governments has shifted. Defying Washington used to mean losing access to security guarantees, economic aid, and diplomatic support. Aligning with Washington now means absorbing higher energy costs, accepting economic isolation from the fastest-growing markets in Asia, and watching your Gulf neighbors build trade relationships you're excluded from. Let me show you the math that explains why Jordan made this decision. And the math is brutal. Jordan imports 95% of its energy. The country has virtually no oil, limited natural gas, and relies entirely on external suppliers for the fuel that keeps its economy running. In 2023, Jordan spent $8 billion on energy imports. That's 14% of the entire national budget going to energy costs alone. When global oil prices spiked following the escalation of regional conflicts in late 2023, Jordan's energy import bill jumped to $6. $1 billion for 2024. That's an additional $1. $3 billion that had to come from somewhere. Where it came from: reduced public services, delayed infrastructure projects, and increased borrowing. Jordan's external debt now stands at $39 billion. That's 88% of GDP. Debt service payments consume 22% of government revenue. Read that again slowly. 1/5 of every dollar the Jordanian government collects goes to paying interest on existing debt, not building hospitals or schools or roads, just servicing the debt accumulated from previous years of budget shortfalls, driven largely by energy import costs. Now here's the calculation Tehran offered. Open your airspace to Iranian flights and we'll route more than 200 commercial flights per month through Jordanian air traffic control. Each overflight generates fees paid to the Jordanian Civil Aviation Regulatory Commission. Average overflight fee for the region: $500 to $800 per flight depending on aircraft size and distance. Multiply that by 200 flights per month. That's $100,000 to $160,000 in monthly revenue. Across a year, that's $2 million to $1, $9 million in airspace fees alone. That number sounds small until you add the second layer. Iran also offered to increase bilateral trade, specifically in agricultural products and industrial goods that Jordan currently imports from Turkey and Europe at higher costs. Preliminary trade agreements signed quietly in February committed Iran to purchasing $50 million worth of Jordanian phosphate and potash annually. Jordan, in return, would purchase Iranian petrochemical products and agricultural equipment. The net effect: Jordan reduces its trade deficit by $30 million to $40 million per year while securing more stable supply chains for critical imports. The third layer: energy cooperation. Iran hasn't offered direct oil sales to Jordan. That would trigger immediate U.S. sanctions under existing legal frameworks. But Iran has offered to facilitate electricity sharing agreements through Iraqi grid connections that link Iranian power generation to Jordanian consumption via the regional interconnection system being built across the Middle East. That arrangement doesn't violate sanctions because the electricity technically originates from Iraqi power plants, even though those plants are supplied by Iranian natural gas. Add it all up: $1. $5 million in airspace fees, $35 million in trade balance improvement, and potential energy cost reductions worth $50 million to $80 million annually if the electricity sharing framework becomes operational. Total economic value to Jordan: $85 million to $115 million per year. That's not enough to solve Jordan's economic crisis, but it's enough to matter when you're running a budget deficit of $1, $2 billion, and searching for every possible revenue source. Now compare that to the cost of saying no to Iran. Saying no means maintaining the status quo: high energy import costs, limited trade diversification, and continued dependence on Gulf aid that has been declining for 3 consecutive years. Saudi Arabia reduced its annual support package to Jordan from $1, $5 billion in 2020 to $800 million in 2024. The UAE cut its commitment from $700 million to $400 million over the same period. Gulf states are redirecting their financial support toward domestic mega projects and away from sustained aid to regional partners that don't generate strategic returns. Jordan looked at those numbers and made a rational calculation. The economic benefit of cooperating with Iran outweighs the theoretical cost of upsetting Washington, especially when Washington isn't offering an alternative economic package that closes the gap. The United States provides $1, $45 billion in annual aid to Jordan. That number hasn't increased since 2018. Inflation over that period reduced the real value of that aid by approximately 20%. Jordan asked for an increase. Washington said maybe next fiscal year. Tehran said yes this quarter. One side produces economic relief on a timeline measured in months. The other side produces promises on a timeline measured in congressional budget cycles. Jordan chose the side that delivers. Now pull back and look at the geopolitical chessboard. Because this isn't just about Jordan. This is about China watching every single move and drawing conclusions about American capacity to hold alliance structures together under economic pressure. China's Belt and Road Initiative has poured $8 billion into Jordanian infrastructure since 2016. Chinese companies built the Atarat oil shale power plant. Chinese firms are developing the Aqaba Special Economic Zone. Chinese investment now accounts for 23% of all foreign direct investment in Jordan. Beijing hasn't made demands about Jordanian foreign policy alignment. Beijing just shows up with financing, construction timelines, and completed projects. When Jordan opens its airspace to Iran, Beijing sees validation of a strategy it's been pursuing across the entire Middle East: offer economic incentives without demanding political alignment, and regional governments will drift away from security partnerships that don't deliver economic results. China doesn't need Jordan to join an anti-American alliance. China just needs Jordan to stop automatically deferring to American preferences. And that's exactly what just happened. The second angle, Russia is watching this with quiet satisfaction. Moscow doesn't have significant economic ties to Jordan. But Russia benefits every time a regional partner demonstrates independence from Washington because it validates the narrative Russia has been pushing since 2015. American primacy is optional, not inevitable. Regional governments can chart their own course. The consequences of defying Washington are manageable, and the benefits of working with alternative partners are real. Every time a country like Jordan makes an independent move, it reduces the perceived cost for the next country considering the same decision. Saudi Arabia restored ties with Iran. Jordan opened its airspace. Who's next? The evidence suggests the answer is either Bahrain or Kuwait, both of which are conducting their own back-channel discussions with Tehran on trade and security arrangements. Neither has announced anything publicly. Both are watching to see whether Jordan faces meaningful consequences for its decision. If Washington imposes costs on Jordan, it signals that independence still carries risks, and other countries will move more cautiously. If Washington does nothing, or if it simply issues a diplomatic protest without material consequences, it signals that the old enforcement mechanisms no longer function, and the regional realignment accelerates. Here's what burned in the NATO conference halls last week when Jordan's directive was published. It's not just airspace access. It's the belief that American security guarantees still outweigh the economic opportunities available through cooperation with rival powers. That belief held the regional order together for 7 decades, and it's fracturing in real time. What comes next depends on how Washington responds. But here are my 3 predictions with a clock attached. First prediction: within 45 days, the United States offers Jordan an increased aid package worth $300 million to $500 million structured as emergency economic support tied to energy cost relief. The goal will be to demonstrate that aligning with Washington still delivers economic benefits and to create political cover for Jordanian officials who oppose the Iran airspace deal. The package will be announced but not immediately delivered, and the funds will take 6 to 9 months to actually reach Jordan's treasury. Second prediction: within 3 months, at least one other regional partner, either Kuwait or Bahrain, announces a similar arrangement with Iran involving either airspace access, port cooperation, or trade normalization. The announcement will use the same language Jordan used: purely administrative, focused on economic efficiency, no political implications. And just like Jordan, the real motivation will be economic pressure combined with declining confidence in American capacity to deliver equivalent benefits. Third prediction: 6 months from now, Iran operates more than 400 flights per month through regional airspace that was completely closed to Iranian aviation just 2 years ago. The flight network will connect Tehran to Beirut, Damascus, Baghdad, and potentially Sana'a if Yemen's airspace becomes accessible. The strategic effect will be normalized Iranian logistics throughout the Middle East theater, built not through military conquest but through patient economic diplomacy, with governments that decided cooperation delivered better results than confrontation. Drop your prediction in the comments. Which happens first, the American aid package to Jordan, another regional partner breaking ranks with an Iran deal, or the full normalization of Iranian airspace access across the Middle East? Tell me because I read every single one, and the range of analysis in this comment section is often better than anything published in mainstream outlets. If this gave you a framework for understanding why a civil aviation directive in Jordan actually represents a fundamental shift in Middle East power dynamics, something you won't get from a three-sentence news brief that treats this as an airline story, share it with one person who needs to understand what's actually happening beneath the surface of these events. The next video goes into the economic warfare dimension that makes this airspace decision even more dangerous than it appears. Subscribe so you're there when it lands.